This is part of a series of talk given by Instituto Superior de Formación Docente número 97 de La Plata, together with Instituto Superior de Formación Docente número 16 Juana Manso de Saladillo. This is a view on Clil. What are we teaching when we teach English? What is our content? Do we teach grammar? Are we just teachers of language? According to the definitions, Content and Language Integrated Learning, CLIL, is a dual-focus educational approach in which an additional language is used for the learning and teaching of both content and language. That is, in the teaching and learning process, there is a focus not only on content and not only on language. Each is interwoven, even if the emphasis is greater on one or the other at a given time. But there's not only one approach to develop CLIL-based lessons. It's best to contextualize CLIL as an umbrella term for all different approaches to integrated content and language at the same time. Content is a point of departure. It's the point of education is not only that students learn, but that they learn something for a reason, and that they learn it from someone. So, as I said, content is a point of departure because it provides teachers with multifaceted opportunities for enhancing learning. Now led by teachers in everyday dialogic practices and the balance of planning, evaluation, inquiry, and reflection with and for learning is a balanced approach. But as I said before, there's not only way of searching for CLIL lessons. There are three ways of looking at content. One that is determined by the established curriculum. It has to do with a prescribed thing. Another one that is more flexible, and it's mostly the one based on project work. And a third one with non-specific content, and the content is chosen by the teachers. Now, what happens in our province of Buenos Aires? And let's see a little bit of our curriculum designs. In primary school, we read: integrar la enseñanza del inglés con otras áreas del currículo, fomentando el desarrollo integral de las niñas y los niños en sus facetas lingüísticas, cognitivas, social, afectiva, artística, entre otras. And later, crear lazos entre el inglés que se enseña en la comunidad local, la escuela, el barrio, el club, el centro cultural y la comunidad global, es decir, el mundo, por medio de proyectos comunitarios cercanos a los intereses de los niños y las niñas. In secondary school, we read: ciclo básico, el inglés y la comunicación, el inglés y el uso de los recursos tecnológicos, el inglés y el discurso literario, and in the other years, in ciclo superior, we read: el enfoque que se propone este diseño curricular para el ciclo superior de la secundaria es el del aprendizaje integrado de contenido y lengua extranjera, ICLE, that is CLIL. Esto no significa de ningún modo dejar a un lado el enfoque comunicativo basado en tareas utilizado en los 3 primeros años de la educación secundaria, sino complementarlo desde una perspectiva que permita a los alumnos poner en práctica lo aprendido en contextos específicos propios de cada tipo de escuela o modalidad. So, saying that, we understand that in our curriculum design is determined by the curriculum. But at the same time, it's flexible because we are not meant to be teaching another subject with a means of English, but we have to teach language, English language, with a content determined in the case of secondary school by the modalities, and in the case of primary school, but what the students are surrounded with. So for content to be situated and embedded in the curriculum, Teachers need to engage in discussion, clarification analysis, and shared understanding of the interconnected nature of subject concepts and discourses, skills, attitudes, and values. Projects, for example, are integral to specific subject knowledge and are interdisciplinary in nature. Tangible connections between school curricula and the outside world. So to talk about CLIL, we need to talk about the 4 C's framework that has into account content, communication, cognition, and culture, the 4 C's. And the 4 are interrelated in teaching and learning in both the first language and the target language. When we say content, we refer to knowledge used in a real socio-cultural context. When we talk about communication, this is referred to as the way in which learners use the foreign language as the target language to communicate. When we talk about cognition, we talk about cognitive or thinking skills that learners engage with to drive the instructional process. And when we talk about culture or intercultural skills, we refer to understanding learners' own culture and other cultures. The 4 elements are interconnected and they are related to the kinds of knowledge and their relation to the cognitive dimension set especially on Bloom's taxonomy. Let's talk about cognition. Cognition involves developing the ability to recognize, understand, and evaluate complex thoughts. Fostering social and emotional growth can also be seen as metacognitive knowledge in that it develops self-knowledge and knowledge about cognitive tasks. Cognition needs to be introduced through tasks that promote problem-solving and higher-order thinking processes. So, the knowledge should be factual, that is, concerning about facts, conceptual, subject-related, procedural, that refers to knowledge of subject-specific skills, techniques, and methods, and metacognitive, in our case, talking about the language. Let's go now to culture. And instead of talking about culture, we are going to talk about cultures. In this case, cultural awareness is fundamental in the study of language. Culture is a valuable source of knowledge to interpret citizenship and to create a feeling of understanding and tolerance among individuals from different backgrounds. It's also used to make students aware of the settings where the target language occurs, and they then can extract information about their use in the language natural context. Communication, a word we often associate a lot with language and language use, focuses on the language that is used as the main instrument to communicate and learn the target content. In this context, the aim of learning is to use the language and its use to learn. This element is fundamental to transfer the knowledge derived from the content of the subject. Thus, the language needs to be clear and comprehensible for the student. Coyle suggests that students need to be competent with different facets of the language. This can refer to the language of learning, that is, to access to concepts related to the topic, the language for learning, to operate in the classroom, the language needed to operate in the classroom, and through learning, that is, to face unplanned curricular and extracurricular situations. And this can be seen in what is called the language triptych that has to do with clear linguistic progression. The language of learning is the language students need to access basic concepts and skills related to the subject or topic. The language for learning is a new language emerging as students are learning, and perhaps the language that is taught. And language through learning, the one students need during lessons to carry out the planned activities effectively, and many times it's not planned, but it is suspected by the teacher that it may occur. Precisely this differentiation between communicative language and academic language establishes the third theoretical framework of language development in CLIL. In this approach, as has been pointed out, the content determines the language that is learned, and not the other way around. First the content, and then the language needed for that content. Therefore, the grammar and the vocabulary is at the service of the content, and never the other way around. That's why these types of language that appear in the classroom have to be interrelated. The balance between the language and the content involves, as we have seen, these three kinds of language that come from this language triptych. The language of learning, the one needed for learners to access concepts and skills that have to do with the topic. The language for learner, the language needed to operate in that content. And the language through learning, that is the unplanned emerging language which appears in classrooms due to the high level of talk, interaction, and dialogic activity. This is a word, scaffolding, that appears a lot in our teaching lessons, or that has to appear at least. So what is the use of scaffolding? And what do we mean with scaffolding? Well, scaffolding is a process of setting up the situation to make the student's entry easy and successful, and then gradually pulling back and handling the role to the child or student in general as he becomes skilled enough to manage it. That is, scaffolding is not permanent. Scaffolding has to be withdrawn at certain parts. We owe this definition to Bruno. So to make sure that students successfully deal with authentic material, and that's something that CLIL asks for, and that as much input as possible can become intake, it's essential for students to receive ample support. They need scaffolding to help them cope with language input of all sorts. The quantity and intensity of scaffolding can be reduced as students' language skills advance. So scaffolding serves several purposes. It reduces the cognitive and linguistic load of the content, that is the input, which means that scaffolding helps students understand the content and language of any given material. It enables students to accomplish a given task through appropriate supportive structuring. And it also supports language production, that is the output, by providing phrases, subject-specific vocabulary, and collocations needed to complete assignments. It helps students to verbalize their thoughts appropriate to the subject matter. In other words, scaffolding done right will boost students' cognitive academic language proficiency. Now let's see some examples of scaffolding. Without scaffolding, we may say, or we may take from a textbook, this particular phrase or instruction that we have heard a lot. Read this test and answer the questions. Is that scaffolded enough? In fact, it's not scaffolded at all. So let's read the same thing, but with scaffolding in mind. Identify the words you do not know. We will discuss those in a minute. First, read the text and write down the three most important aspects of the text. Write down what you already know about this topic and come up with 3 questions you don't know the answer to yet. These are just examples. You may find many others, you may think of many more, but the idea is that you may encounter this instruction, read the text and answer questions, in a textbook that maybe is prescribed for you, but you can add these other ways of scaffolding so you help students understand better and remember that scaffolding fosters independence and autonomy. And this is another item that is sometimes put in question when we talk about CLIL, and that is the use of authentic material. Now, authentic material is better to be used in Clil, and we can find this in many places. Nowadays, with the internet, we have loads of places where to look for authentic material that may be interested for students, like videos, podcasts, material produced by our own students or by students from other areas or other years, instruction manuals, National Geographic for kids, there are videos there too, fairy tales, company websites, instructions, materials from other subject areas, Instagram posts, etc., etc. And that is something very important, learning to use the language and using the language to learn. So that's why Clil views the language as at service for the content. But not that we don't teach grammar or vocabulary. We teach the grammar and vocabulary needed for students to use the language appropriately with that content. And a word on inputs and outputs. We provide input, but only a small amount is taken in by students. And at the same time, only a small amount is turned into output. So the more the input, the bigger and better the output, because in this process of input, making it intake and making it output, there's a lot of loss. Now, what shall we do in an ideal lesson plan? And this is not just for Clil, but for any kind of approach. Of course, using warming up or whatever the name you want to connect it with a preparation for the plan, for the lesson, sorry. So warming up has to be done in connection with the topic. That can be discussion language there, content and learning skills, but also finding out what the students already know in many ways, but also providing the inputs of the reading, listening, and watching. How can we do the discussion and the warming up? Through discussion, games, input connecting to the main topic, crossword, cross-curricular connections, important terms, pictures, word search, digital resources, asking them what they know, mind maps, questions and answers, spoken and written, alone or in pairs, etc., etc. For the second, content and learning skills, we need to explain the content and the language aims, how you're going to go about, that is also the procedure, and learn the skills needed. After we've seen what students know about the subject and the personal interest, we have to work towards the information that that lesson is given. That is the input, that would be reading, listening, watching, or the three together. Looking for general to specific information. But by the end, we should be doing cooperative work to compare results, for example, use information to create something else, and that would be like the last stage of our lesson plan, because creation is a cognitive skill of higher order. And so we can do lots of things for them to write, to read, or to deliver a speech, information gap, checks on reading, etc., etc. But after that, it's very interesting to work with critical questioning, focusing on the content, but also on the language and on the process, and presenting some kind of outcome. Remember that the outcomes, anyone you think of, has to have an audience. But what do we think, or what do we mean when we talk about order thinking skills? From the lower order up to the higher order, that is, from the lots to the hots. That is what Bloom established as a taxonomy, that is a kind of classification, that is very helpful when we plan, thinking that remembering and all other activities that have to do with the remembering thing is the lowest order thinking skill, You see, remembering, listing, identifying, memorizing, and describing, those are activities that we do since we are very little from the mature point of view, they are cognitive skills that do not require much thinking. So we should go to creating, that is one of the highest, together with collaborating, role-playing, adapting, constructive. But the idea is that we can use the ones in the middle to scaffold. So we have understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating. We have to be sure that we don't stop in the middle, like in applying, but we move them forward. Now, how can we use CLIL in the classroom? And these are some activities, ideas of activities. Remembering that in CLIL lessons, the focus is both in language and content, something that is integrated. So let's think what type of language is needed and what kind of questions can be asked in the following activities. This is a typical activity that you may find in a textbook. It's a picture that says, look at the pictures. What kind of task could you ask students? We can ask the typical, what can you see in the picture? What is it about? How can you, what can you do with this element, etc., etc. But we can also be or go a little bit beyond and ask this kind of questions or tasks. For example, list 6 fruits you can see, or find something which isn't a fruit or vegetable. Group the foods. How many did you make? Can you grow these foods in your country? Create a recipe from the food in the picture. Now, what are we doing here? We are going from remembering in the first example, the list 6 fruits you can see, because you are asking students to remember the names of the fruit and identifying them in the picture, that is from the lowest higher order thinking skill. And these activities have a progression and they go from the lower to the highest, because afterwards in number 2 we are moving forward to comparing and contrasting and also identifying. In number 3 we are dividing and classifying. In number 4 is prediction or reasoning, or both. And in the last one is creative thinking and creation, that is the highest. So you see that with simple tasks and activities, we move students from the lowest thinking skills to the highest. Let's see another example. Thinking about a history lesson or a language lesson with a historical content. You see that the text is life in the Paleolithic age, and afterwards there are some questions. But on the right, we have classified these questions into lower order thinking questions and higher order thinking questions. For example, in the lower order, which animal is being hunted? What are the men using to hunt the animal? And in the higher order thinking skills, how was the animal trapped? What do you think the men will do with the animal next? So we move to prediction, we move to reflection, and reasoning and coming to conclusions. So these contribute much more to their developing of cognitive skills. Something for kids. Now you present your kids with these pictures and they have to guess the content. And what is the content? It could be technology, it could be gadgets, it could be things for the future. In fact, it is the best inventions of 2021. You can tell your students that there is an association of consumerism, Consumer Technology Association, that holds an event called the Consumer Electronics Show. And these are part of that show. So you can ask them questions about the content, they can guess the content, you can tell them later that it's best inventions of 2021, and many questions can arise from here. Which one would you like to have at home? What do you think number 1 or number 2 or number 5 does? What is the most important invention you can see here? What do you think they are? Etc., etc. Moving them from the lots to the wholes. And then when you present the text, this is taken from Time for Kids, the Time magazine for kids. Instead of presenting the whole text that is really extensive because it talks about all the inventions, you choose 4 and you work with images and the text from reading. They have to read and match. They can describe the pictures first so they get the vocabulary. You can predict the vocabulary if you want. The text is not complicated if you divided it in chunks and you are using your scaffolding to help them. I mean, the text is taken from here, where you have lots of different interesting and real-life articles, but for kids. So it's not meant for teaching, it's not meant for ESL, but as it is for kids, the language is better for us to use. If you want to find some other article, podcast, or timelines, you can also go to that website that is mentioned there, that is Nat Geo Kids. Now, what do we mean with all these things putting together? That in Clil, what is important is this relationship between content and language and how to integrate them. And it is really important that we have into account the idea of that the language is an essential component of deeper learning. And it's not limited to learning in and through a foreign language. It also has to do with the skills that they can use in their own language. It goes far beyond CLIL and encompasses every kind of learning in any kind of subject, in any kind of language. So, as a closing comment, I can say that language as a means for learning about the world, that is important. Learning as a process of making meaning, and language learning as building one's meaning, making potential to make meaning in particular context. Knowledge is viewed as meaning, a resource for understanding and acting on the world. Thank you very much. These are the means of communication. And if you scan this code, you may have the PDF of this PowerPoint. Thank you.